Hi, everybody. Welcome to Holiday Week. My name is Lindsay Nielsen, and I'm the managing marketing manager at EcoEngineers. I wanted to welcome everybody to our webinar on optionality, carbon credit stacking, and project diversification. So let's introduce our speakers. We're going to have Roxby Hartley, who's our climate risk director at ECO, and David LaGreca, who is a senior carbon consultant and handles all of our voluntary market projects. Is kind of a new fuel type, if you will, for us at ECO. So I'm glad you're on board with us as we discover these voluntary markets. So let me start the video for you.
Carbon is the biggest disruptor of the 21st century, and the world as we know it is changing. EcoEngineers can guide you to make the best decisions as you navigate toward your clean energy goals. Our diverse team of carbon analysts, engineers, scientists, auditors, and regulatory specialists are trusted advisors of the clean energy fuel sectors worldwide. Clean energy regulations are a maze. We simplify them with an unbiased approach and fully manage your compliance. Modeling your carbon reduction is complicated. We quantify your emissions with a rigor based in science. Together, we can create markets that will protect and grow your investment. We create sustainable solutions for a better tomorrow. We are EcoEngineers.
Hi, I'm Shashi Menon, a CEO of EcoEngineers. That video you just saw is EcoEngineers in a nutshell. We're a team of consultants, auditors, engineers, and scientists with deep expertise in low-carbon fuels, emerging technologies, and policies that are helping decarbonize the world. We are at the heart of the energy transition. At EcoEngineers, we are laser focused on aiding, assisting, and supporting this transition to a clean energy economy. Through our education programs, our science-based approach to life cycle carbon analysis, through our asset development support, our engagement with policymakers, and through our compliance management and auditing teams, we provide a 360 approach to usher in the clean energy transition. The ultimate success of low carbon fuel projects and ultimately the future of our planet depends on the successful execution of net zero goals. And that's exactly what our team is here to help you do. Thank you.
Thank you for that introduction. I'm really excited today to be giving a webinar with David. David is our expert in the voluntary markets, and EcoEngineers has traditionally worked in the compliance markets. And David and his knowledge base has introduced something that we've had before, but not quite at the scope and scale. And that is we have optionality in the carbon markets. And so today we're going to talk about the different voluntary and compliance markets, how they fit together and how they might not fit together, and see what options you might have for your projects going forward. I'm going to start on the compliance markets, and a good example of this, I think most people who know us know we work in the California Low Carbon Fuel Standard, and that's the LCFS. And that's an example of a compliance market where there are obligated parties that are required to take part in the program. These sort of programs where you're obligating companies require broad political support to get them into law. And the reason is that they can be quite expensive for established businesses. They are highly regulated. The carbon has to be accurately measured, strictly audited, because part of the reason why it's hard to implement these is they're going to come under scrutiny by all stakeholders, and therefore they have to have high integrity. They tend to be smaller markets, though I would argue the LCFS market is one of the larger markets. And in terms of risk, they're low risk. Integrity is critical because of all the political pressures. And that's the compliance markets. And for the voluntary markets, I'm going to hand over to David and let him describe the properties of voluntary markets.
Yeah, certainly. So voluntary markets both become compliance markets, and compliance markets are emerged out of voluntary markets. So voluntary markets frequently fill in the gaps for where regulation leaves off. So when only a sector is capped, such as the RGGI sector in the United States only caps power, that leaves a broad spectrum of the emissions that are lingering to remain unaffected by any kind of carbon market. The most common perspective on voluntary carbon markets is for actual credits being sold, bought, and transacted and developed. They're going to be paid for by good actors and by companies who are trying to mitigate their emissions in a way that they can't do from their own supply chain operations. The implementation cost is going to change drastically between different project types. It costs a very different amount to implement a forestry project than it does a landfill gas project or a CCS project. And they're going to be regulated by independent bodies, mostly nonprofit bodies such as Verra, Gold Standard types, not under a regulated entity until the following conference of the parties next year, where there's a chance where governments will step back into the voluntary markets.
What we're going to talk about is how these markets overlap, where companies can find value. And ideally, this will act as a roadmap for a project to say, okay, we can do this, we can do all these different activities, and we can take part in all these different markets. And some of the money that can be obtained by sustainability goals is not really linked to the amount of carbon that's being offset. An example would be the IRA bill provisions. And basically, the IRA bill provisions are an incentive for companies to produce alternative fuels. And there is a threshold GHG reduction, but it's not a carbon trading market. Same for the blenders tax credit. That's to incentivize the production of alternative fuels, and that's going to be replaced by the 45Z, but it's not something that counts carbon. Cap and trade programs are interesting because they do count emissions under scope 1, but they don't tend to actually do life cycle analysis and say, hey, you've reduced the carbon intensity of emissions from this fuel by a certain amount, or necessarily count the carbon in other ways. And there are other incentive programs out there which are grant giving programs that help projects go forward, but don't count carbon. We know that credit stacking, this is where you can claim multiple credits or multiple benefits from environmental attributes for a fuel, certainly. Classically, this has been the RFS and the LCFS combined with the blenders tax credit. It makes a lot of money for fuel companies. And interestingly, for the LCFS has an ability to be combined with the RFS because the LCFS is essentially contained both geographically and in the details of the regulation. It's almost a subset of the RFS. The carbon that you gain from the LCFS can also be counted in the RFS, which enables you to take the money from both markets. The other elements that you can claim are not carbon counting are the tax credits, and then again there's tax on other fuels. So if you're selling renewable diesel in California, you're not taxed essentially under the cap and trade. You don't have to go out and buy California carbon allowances. Because the petroleum fuel does, that means that you've got a competitive advantage and can actually get more money for your fuel, even though there's no carbon accounting on that fuel. And then again, these are being there's a 45Q and the 45Z. The 45Q is for CCS credits, and that can be combined with fuel pathways. So if you're capturing CO2 at an ethanol plant, you can combine the credits for injecting that CO2 underground. Ethanol plants handily have the volume to meet the requirements of the 45Q. And then you can also sell that carbon through the pathway, or if you wanted to, you could sell that carbon independently into a voluntary market. And the 45Z is going to be similar. What we don't quite know is how 45Z and 45Q are going to interact, what the boundaries of those systems are. Unfortunately, there's lots of acronyms on this slide, and we have a glossary that we can hand out. And I'm going to hand this over to David to talk about all these different credit streams, schemes, and also hopefully interpret some of the acronyms.
First off, before we dive into the alphabet soup here, it's important to recognize that credit stacking is different from double counting. So double counting is where you have an emission or an emission reduction that is quantified in multiple locations in the same way. So like Roxby was mentioning previously, the LCFS system in California can be combined with the RFS system because one of the systems embodies the carbon in the fuel and the other system does not. In the voluntary carbon market scheme, it's imperative that the same claim is not made twice for the same exact environmental attribute. So with that level set, we can start to discuss how tax credits can be benefited by adding voluntary programs to them, voluntary credits to combine with the tax scheme in particular. So under 45Q and many of the Inflation Reduction Act or the IRA programs, there's a tax incentive for a particular behavior or a particular activity to take place. 45Q, for instance, is a tax incentive program with varying levels of incentive for various activities for capturing, sequestering, or using carbon dioxide. It is based off of a stream of carbon dioxide being captured. However, you are getting a tax credit for doing so. It is not a mandate to do this activity, nor is it going to be a reduction credit. It is a tax credit on the US government IRS page rather than it is on your balance sheet specifically. And because of that, you can frequently attach a voluntary credit to it. This is nascent and this is a new approach, but it is, as we'll see in coming slides, this is increasingly important for expensive industries to be able to implement their new innovative technologies. In other sectors, such as in renewable natural gas or RNG, there's programs such as RINs or renewable identification numbers from the US EPA. Sometimes those programs, when they're at a particular scale, that is not the only incentive required to make that activity occur. You can occasionally tie in renewable natural gas programs to voluntary programs, such as through the Climate Action Reserve, VCS, which is Verified Carbon Standard, Gold Standard, American Carbon Registry. There's a new program under Green E now, which is being run in tandem with an accounting program known as MRETS. And in this space, there's increasing opportunities. It's complex based on which fuel type and the quantity of fuels that are being generated. Other sectors, it's also such as agriculture. There's a great number of opportunities to match up climate smart ag programs, for instance, or California climate investments with voluntary programs, which will quantify the environmental atmospheric benefits of sequestering carbon in soils. Also increasing in this space is a slightly different topic of insetting, where you're not selling a credit, but rather you're including that carbon benefit into your commodity itself or into your land management practices. The incentives keep going. We could spend all day talking about those, but in a general perspective, it's a way to add the voluntary market to a compliance program in order to make your practice actually happen.
It's been great, David, coming on board, because not only because of his wide knowledge in the voluntary markets, but also he can explain to us what all the acronyms are. And thank you very much for that PDF together, David. It's very kind of you.
Absolutely, and we can send out any kind of follow-up that is needed on that end. So, as I mentioned earlier, there are certain technologies which have a very high upfront implementation cost, especially as the technology becomes more mature. A very prime example of this is carbon capture and sequestration, also known as CCS, CCUS, X, depending on which industry and which fuel type you're capturing the emissions from. An example that I think well represents this entire case is an ethanol plant. We work with certain ethanol plants in the United States in order to reduce their carbon intensity of their product and to help them find the best markets for their CCS activities, whether it be in the LCFS program or in the voluntary market program. So ethanol plants have a very pure stream of carbon dioxide. Just the nature of the process to generate ethanol has a very straightforward stream of CO2, which can then be captured in a very high 97, 99% purity rate, subsequently either liquefied, chilled, or otherwise captured and subsequently injected into deep pore spaces adjacent to the facility or sent to a pipeline and off-site. For this case study, we'll talk about 100,000 tons a year, which is a pretty standard number we've seen in that vicinity from mid-size ethanol plants across the Midwest in the United States. And it is handy to be located in a conducive geologic zone. So if you have, and by that I mean being co-located with some form of pore space in your immediate proximity. There are other options to tie into one of the 3 major pipelines that are in development in the United States. That opens up a whole other can of worms. There is a general implementation cost associated with any sort of CCS activity. Any of these projects are going to have a high upfront cost. I selected $125 a ton because that seems at the low end for a well-situated, well-economically planned out system for carbon capture in an ethanol plant in the US. The way to get to that $125 a ton is not necessarily linear. There's not necessarily one quick way to do it. The US government and the Inflation Reduction Act under subsection 45Q is offering up to $80 per ton of CO2 that is sequestered according to their methodology and according to if you meet certain standards. That value goes down for carbon capture and utilization. It goes up beyond that for direct air capture and other technology types. But in general, we'll call it $85 a ton, which does not get you to the project cost per ton of CO2 being injected. So we can all agree that a pure stream of CO2 should not be vented into the atmosphere unless absolutely necessary. So to get there, that's where the voluntary markets once again step in. To get to that break-even point, you need another $40 per ton to reach that threshold to justify installing the carbon capture equipment. The 45Q program went a long ways towards bringing about these kinds of projects, but it's not quite there. So we're seeing clients coming at us to see if we can help them obtain that extra $40 or whatever the exact economic value is that is required from a voluntary market perspective to make their project viable and maybe even profitable down the road.
And how does that work? Because I know the ethanol plants could sell the carbon by insetting it into their fuel effectively, by lowering their CI score. And carbon credits in California, what, $65 a ton, but they're likely to go back up. Giving the $40 a ton maybe from the voluntary markets gives optionality around the project. It's particularly if it takes a while for it to get a pathway approved, the project's in action. If you worked in California pathways before, you know there's a lag before you get a pathway certified. And voluntary markets can fit in there as well. So not only does it give you a ability to underwrite the likely carbon costs with the voluntary market, but it also gives you options when you might not have your pathway is changing.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So because the voluntary markets and compliance markets do not work inherently in tandem with each other, there's that time lag, like Roxy mentioned, before your pathway is approved or regulation is undergoing review. And alternatively, there are different registration pathways that are opening up every few months now with new methodologies that are coming online. So as one market price increases and the other one decreases, there is the option to turn one off and turn one on in certain instances. And that's part of the optionality that we're talking about. Providing yourselves with the opportunity to maintain a source of revenue even when the economics are conflicting and constantly changing.
Now, it's interesting because we talk about the carbon markets and all these different options and how they're expanding. And it's important to understand how these regulations fit together. And of course, EcoEngineers can help you with that. And as a last word, I think I'd like to say that we're really at the thin end of the wedge for the carbon markets. These markets are going to grow and expand as more and more carbon has to be offset. All our emissions for whatever we do have to be offset. So all we can say is that these markets are going to continue to grow and continue to strengthen, and we'll help you find the path through them. And with that, I'd like to hand back over to Lindsay. I think we're ready for questions and answers.
So I do have a question that I want to get asked here on this CCS project example. Would there be an opportunity, do you think, to also, we're talking about optionality and, the different options available to your credit stacking. Are there other options instead of just the 45Q and voluntary markets?
Yeah, so in this instance, the optionality really comes to play in whether or not you just get a 45Q tax credit, whether or not you add in a voluntary carbon credit, and then additionally, the example I'm thinking of from a real project we're working on currently is assessing the LCFS, low carbon fuel standards pathway as well into California. So the optionality is going to arise at where you find your highest value for your credit. So LCFS has a CCS protocol as well, which can get credits under that pathway, in addition to the fuel itself being sold in the California market, and then trying to figure out at which point in time the voluntary credit will take off versus the compliance credit. So it takes 3 to 6 months to get a pathway approved into California, and in that amount of time, we are working with a client to get them voluntary credits to cover the period of time which they're capturing and improving their atmospheric contributions. So they're sequestering pretty large quantities of carbon credits at that time, very large volumes of carbon at that time, and we're trying to earn them carbon credits by doing so, so that they're not out on any of the benefits that they've rightfully earned by incorporating this new and expensive practice.
So it's like you can turn one off and turn the other one on whenever it's convenient, or whenever the money matches up, right?
And also, for a while, it might take a while to get a pathway, and the voluntary market is easier to set up. So you can sell the voluntary credits perhaps while waiting for the pathway, but there's no temporary pathway under the LCFS for CCS credits. So you might be injecting for a while without the ability to generate credits. And it's interesting because it's for carbon capture. Carbon capture is not a removal until you've actually removed the CO2 by whichever methodology you're going to do, and that might be, in this case, logical sequestration. So the 45Q applies to a whole host of different removals, where everything from DAC, where you direct air capture, through ethanol fermenters, CO2 capture, and perhaps also stacked gas capture as well. It's the whole gamut of carbon capture technologies can use the 45Q.
I do have a question here about can companies operating outside of the US take advantage of some of these opportunities?
It depends on which opportunity. Because 45Q is, if that's the one we're talking about, the answer is yes, with proper incorporation. I mean, we're not tax lawyers here, so look outside for that. But as far as if you set up shop in the United States with a carbon capture technology, or if you're investing in a renewable natural gas facility, for instance, or a solar installation, you're trying to get investment tax credit, production tax credit, that can frequently be, like a production tax credit can be tied with a renewable energy credit without any issue. And as far as I'm aware, there aren't any international boundaries for that. So it's, reach out to us and we'll answer your question on your exact industry.
Yeah, and DAC, if you're capturing carbon through DAC and storing it, then the DAC credits are available from California, no matter where you are in the world. It has to be an onshore storage. You have to meet the requirements of the CCS protocol, but then you can capture that carbon anywhere in the planet, basically.
Perfect. So a couple questions about the 45Z. Is the plan for it to replace the current blender's tax credit? And what other things could it possibly be stackable with? And I know, David, you said something very important, that we are not a tax firm, but we can definitely provide some consulting services. But based on that, what can we say about the 45Z versus blender's tax credit?
45Z is going to replace the blender's tax credit for plants that can take the blender's tax credit at the moment, and it's going to be stackable with the LCFS and the IFS. It is a tax incentive. It isn't it's not counting carbon. It's not selling carbon credits.
And here's another kind of crystal ball type question. Beyond California, Oregon, and Washington, and now all of Canada, what do we see as the next states to implement an LCFS program or something similar, or why? What states are we keeping an eye on?
I'll go for New York, New Mexico, and Colorado are the ones that I think are top of my list.
I think New Mexico is the farthest along as far as I'm aware, but we'll see if
New Mexico has come very close, but it's been killed. They've tried twice, it's been killed twice. It's been very close.
Great. Thanks, guys. And definitely get in touch with us too. We have a whole regulatory engagement team that is constantly looking at updates and other legislative options that are coming around. Here's one for you, David. Are removal credits and offset credits worth the same in value?
So funkiness in voluntary markets. So the answer is going to annoy most people on this call, but no. And the same exact project type could be valued differently by a different buyer. That's kind of the fun of the voluntary markets, and also some of the disadvantages. So there's not a set price, with the exception of a couple of commodification approaches that are out on the market right now, like the GO and the NGO, for some kind of static tradable futures for carbon credits. There's hardly any exact established price. There's some market boundaries for each project type, but it all comes down to bilateral deals at the end of the day. So in response to the removals and offsets, so far part of it is supply and demand. There is an absolute dearth of removals credits on the market right now, partially because it wasn't really conceived of as that important until the last, I don't know, 5 to 10 years, and the projects that are coming online now are getting large funding. So there will be a new thrust into the market for these credits, and we'll see how CCS, with the millions of tons coming online in 2025, 2026, are going to impact those values. But offsets are valued lower at this point in time. Part of that's perception issues and the concept of people trying to reduce their own emissions prior to offsetting any emissions, and partially due to political perceptions globally of these types of credits. So it's going to be about the quality of the credit and then the bilateral deal at the end of the day.
Let's go. One of our main legacy products is activated carbon for vapor capture in gasoline car fuel tanks. Can this activated carbon generate CCS credits? Seems a very specific question.
Exactly how it works, where the carbon's coming from and where it goes. There's a lot to that question. I've got a host of questions to reply.
a lot of very, very project specific questions, and feel free to reach out to us, and we can definitely give you some more details about that.
I would say people
So
are pushing the boundaries of 45Q right now with what is and isn't carbon capture and sequestration, and it's gonna be really interesting to see what ultimately achieves that level of credit.
Right. So here's one: if carbon credits are sold, can the such as emissions have been reduced in the creation of such credits, can the project owner claim the reductions in addition to selling the credits, or is that double counting?
That's definition textbook double counting right there. So if you're
you could say, well, I'm helping somebody else meet their goals by selling carbon, but you can't double count the carbon.
Right. It's the same thing for insetting on an agricultural product or anything like that. If you're claiming an exact carbon benefit to a project activity, if your company then sells that outside of its boundaries and then says our product has reduced carbon by XYZ in our supply chain, then yeah, that's inappropriate.
We're having a lot of questions about woody biomass and how it has the renewable fuel standard, and the EPA submitted or accepted any wood RINs. Do you guys have any intel on that?
Yeah, these 7 RINs are being sold at the moment. Not many. I believe they're all going to the heating oil market.
Let's see. So if your RNG is used to make hydrogen, can you earn carbon credits also on the hydrogen?
That's a difficult one.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean that's one of the approaches that has been bandied about. I've been reading in publications lately. I don't have specific insight on that one though.
We'd have to look into the projects, and I don't think we have enough information about the boundaries of certainly of the IRA build provisions to really answer that question as yet.
That does make a lot of these answers a little difficult too, because part of it is what's written on paper, and part of it's what happens after lawsuits pass for the next 6 to 12 months, what actually gets approved and remains. So it's hard to make a definitive response to some of these.
Yeah.
Speaking of other markets, is Minnesota close to having a program with the Landfill Gas Innovation Act? Or are they heading that direction? No, you didn't mention Minnesota when we were talking about emerging. Do we know anything about where they're at?
I don't. I haven't been. I know we've been involved with trying to set up a program in Minnesota. So if you could, we can answer the question about how far along they are, but I'd have to speak to somebody else in the office who's been dealing with that.
So are any of these credits affected or negated if one should utilize foreign manufactured CCUS units? For example, how does the PTC change if one used electrolyzer manufacturers from outside the US?
Typically, the project capital costs aren't counted in the project. Setting up the carbon storage isn't. You don't typically add the capital cost of building the manufacturing into the calculation.
The production tax credit, though, specifically incentivizes American-made components, and so does the investment tax credit. It does not negate the possibility of earning the entire credit, at least right now, but that is a phased-in component that is going to be litigated internationally on free trade agreement premises. And it's already been brought up by the European Union and some other Mexico as far as anti-competitiveness types of rationale. So, but yeah, the foreign-made components are not going to be earning extra credits compared to domestically made components. But at the moment, you're not directly penalized until I believe it's like 2024 that phases in the current draft.
What is going to be the impact of eRINs on this entire situation?
I'd say eRINs are going to be a parallel driver. So instead of earning RINs on just the liquid fuel component, generating electricity for purposes of transportation is going to open up a broad diversity of new project types. I think it's going to tie in with hydrogen. It's going to tie in with RNG. It's going to tie in with existing operations that are going to create new book and claim approaches. It's going to be interesting.
It's going to have a huge impact on how fuel supply is managed. For a long time, we said you can't take RNG to electricity simply because you lose a RIN. The RIN's so valuable. So it's going to depend on the values of the RINs as well, which markets. But it also leads to even more optionality if you can pick and choose which credit to take from a particular program.
The last question I wanted to ask here, I'm going to probably just answer, how does one learn more about the voluntary carbon market? And the answer is definitely to contact our in-house voluntary market expert, David LaGreca. He has so much knowledge on the alphabet soup that we were talking about earlier and how your project might qualify. Do you guys have any other, Roxby and David, have any parting comments or anything before we let these people go back to their regularly scheduled days?
You know, what seems to be the most obvious approach I've found by looking at dozens of projects this year is it's not always that way. It's worth digging into the weeds of the hundreds of protocols that are out there, and as well as the different compliance mechanisms, because your forest carbon project may or may not comply with California regulations, and you don't know until you really get into it. You might be selling a voluntary credit when you could be selling a compliance grade, or vice versa. And it's all in the details with these programs, and that's pretty much the whole reason EcoEngineers exists, is to be able to answer those types of complex questions.
Exactly.
All right. Well, thanks everybody. Hope you have a great holiday, and we will talk to you soon.